how the next 45 minutes will work. A reminder to the audience, if you have got a question, to pop that into the chat and we'll pick it up. There'll be 3 main question areas that we'll work through. The key trends, key things that we're seeing right now, what's coming up, and how as a HR community, how as a payroll community, how as technologists supporting this space, can we best prepare ourselves and the people we represent so that we're taking advantage if it's an opportunity, or we're helping to protect if it's something that actually is coming in and we need to find out how to deal with it. So that's how the next 45 minutes will go in terms of signposting. So I will come to Chloe first with question 1, which is, what are the kind of things that you're seeing right now? What are those trends? Are they new? Are there things that have come up that have never been there, or are they largely the same things that people have been doing, talking about for the last 20 years and they're just being rebadged? What's your view?
Yeah, great question. And do you know, it's such a broad question, isn't it? And you could talk about this all day and you could go to so many different topics. I do think things are more heightened. I do think things are becoming more focused, and you know, a lot about what Sarah's already talked about. And I think if I think back to 10, 15 years ago, even after the financial services crash I went through in the financial services sector, you know, the pace and which we continue to accelerate at, and the way things are hitting, I think, organizations, it's if not more, and continues to be that incredibly tough environment. So therefore, I think things are having to become much more focused and much more deliberate. And whether it's because I lived through the reality of COVID in a retail sector, but if you didn't transform, you didn't survive, right? It was as simple as that. And whether you talked about, you know, we could pick anything, couldn't we? Cost of living now, the war for talent, the quiet quitting, all these different things that are emerging very quickly and hitting organizations. There's still people boardroom issues, and, you know, ever more boardroom issues. And for all the clients that I get to work with, and actually my peer group, you know, all my old contacts and my friends and my peer group, but certainly if I bring it local to me, my role and my organization, I think the biggest thing I'm seeing is HR having to drive proper transformation and value from their technology investment. And what do I mean by value? I think it's two really specific things, but technology is by far one of the biggest investments that we make, isn't it? And one of the biggest enablers. And certainly working in a really low cost margin business that I did in the retail sector, you know, getting value from every penny that you invest is really, really important. But then more than ever, I think now actually that digital driving value to the bottom line of the business is the priority for HR. So how you get, and exactly as Sarah's just talked in spades about, how you get HR and technology, to drive value and hit the bottom line in some of the biggest areas that we and challenges we focus on, whether that's, you know, the real issue we have got around corporate, you know, issues around talent, diversity, inclusion, you know, experience, all those big people agenda items that our boardroom discussions have to be given value or drive value through technology. And, you know, I still see so much today where, you know, various different examples where organizations have got the technology, they're investing in it, but they're not getting the value that they should be getting, and how they truly impact strategic priorities of the business through that technology. And I think the reason it's so critical, and Sarah's already talked about it, is, you know, getting that data and insights out. So I think the theme of technology and value is because data and insights, you know, when you're sat at that boardroom and you've got such a big boardroom issue, and, you know, the chief exec's looking at you as a CPO or CHRO, and you can't tell them because your data is so poor what the answer to the question is, let alone drive really strategic decisions based on good insights and analytics. So that, you know, being able to make corporate decisions that deliver your business strategy, you know, HR absolutely have got to be able to do that now more than ever because of the climate and you know, the world that we exist in. So
no,
yeah.
that's really valid, and I've got a follow-up question, look, before I come to Giles next. Given you've come over to the dark side, had you gone into this type of role earlier and gone back into a HRD role, would you have taken different decisions about some of the challenges and things that you did in a HR role? And is that perhaps something that might help senior HR leaders to move into more business focused roles and come back into HR as part of developing their people capability?
Yeah, 100%. You know, and it's one of the reasons I took the role, because I really wanted to understand how digital can be an enabler. You know, people say technology shouldn't drive a strategy, but if you I'm going to come on to talk about it in the future trends, but you know what we're experiencing as consumers now, HR have to be able to understand how we deliver that for our colleagues in the same way. You know, we have one very advanced experience, don't we, digitally, and COVID has exponentially moved that forward, that we kind of have got used to in our lives, but we don't necessarily get from an employee perspective. And I personally don't think I understood well enough how technology can really, good and bad, you know, I've seen both in spades, but how I would be much more uncompromising now about digital being the, you know, how can we automate, how can we simplify, how can we use AI, how can we use, and not just one technology, multiple technologies, best of breed, best of market. But I think I didn't, whilst I was led part of and delivered big transformations, I think when you then end up in the day job in HR, you get so buried with so many conflicting priorities and moving at pace that sometimes you don't have the capacity to be really deep into one area. And I think HR as a whole hasn't got digital expertise that does that thinking for the function. So it's really hard to say, you know, go and become a digital expert when you're in a HRD role with 50,000 people and, you know, stuff hitting you at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But actually how the function reorientates itself is the bigger question that I think we'll come on to.
No, I think that's very insightful, and hopefully others will have heard that and thought, you know what, maybe it's a good idea for me to take a step to the right and then take a step back. It'll make me a more rounded individual because I'll have different perspectives than I might have just going through a functional career path. So thank you for that, Chloe. Really insightful. And a perfect segue into Giles. Same question, Giles, but with your background and connections with the CIPD, some of those points I think have huge relevance, don't they, for our community, that we're trying to build their careers and develop their skills to meet the growing needs of an increasingly digital world that we operate within. And part of that is the content, the way that we give them material and we help them. But part of it as well is the base skills, perhaps, of these individuals, and whether they are starting off from the right level of digital capacity to be able to grow in that space. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, as well as your view on the current trends.
No worries. So just a little bit to cover there. So okay, so I'll start the ball rolling with the current trends. And I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate and a grumpy so-and-so on a Friday. But and that is that I'm a bit perturbed at the moment by a number of things being sort of banded around in terms of trendy words. And I think we've got to be very careful about buzzwords. You know, quiet hiring, quiet firing, quiet quitting. They've been going on years. It's just people put another label on it. They've always been that individual that's been moaning in the corner, that's been with the company for 20 years. I want to leave the company. Why have you not left? But they just put it on managed, or those quiet quitting where the managers have maybe not managed their people appropriately in terms of performance and capability. That's nothing new. I think we're just putting some more, more. I think it's become more prevalent maybe post-COVID, where we've had that sudden everyone's come back to it or reconnected, and that may be more visible. But I'm going to argue some of those are not new. I think there's also some interesting sort of perspective at the moment between the difference between hybrid and flexible working. There has been confusion about which is what and how does that matter, whereas hybrid working is a balance of asynchronous and synchronous work and everything in different places. And I think that there's some confusion about what does that look like. And whilst we've seen more organizations adopt it and use it, I think we're also seeing now a backlash in terms of organizations saying, no, you need to be here. And actually there's a social element of work we forget that is about bouncing and learning off people as well. And I think we'll see how that plays out in due course. It's an interesting world at the moment. In the same light, we return to work. The idea of we've always focused from an EDI perspective, mainly on women returning to work, etc., post having children, other choices or career choices. I think that's a great thing and we should not lose that. But on the EDI space as well, I've always worried the fact that we focused on that, which is the right thing to do. But we haven't moved the dial as much as we've hoped. Yet we've had laws for 50 years. What's happened? I think part of the reason is that maybe someone hasn't gone to prison. That might be why that we haven't changed behaviours. And that to me is a concern, because I think EDI is a fantastic thing if we appreciate it. But people have been very keen to tick the boxes in terms of the protected characteristics, not understand how they connect, what value they bring, and more importantly, no one respects to a certain extent sometimes the diversity of thought, which actually leads to innovation, new ways of thinking, other ways. On the next one, in terms of the 4-day week, I think everyone's talking about at the moment as well. So return to work, sorry, just to expand upon that, we're now focused on the over 50s. The fact is a lot of employment is focused on youth employment over the last couple of decades. There's now that movement. It's actually people can live longer and therefore they're used to work longer and therefore they're potentially their pensions might not last. So there's an interesting change in dynamic there. A 4-day week as well, which I think is a great idea in context, as a concept, but doesn't always work in context. What is great news is that I think it's over 95% of those who have adopted in a survey are continuing with it. But I asked the question, those 5%, why have they not continued with it? We need to learn that, because there may be organizations with a different context we can learn from. And I have to be careful about, especially with hybrid working as well, we don't run the risk of creating two-tier workforces. Whereas those who can work more flexible, more hybrid, and we almost creating another elite when others say, well, I can't do that. What's my, that causes problems in itself in terms of engagement. So ChatGPT, obviously the big one everyone's talking about as well. I'll set the expectation here is I'm not scared by it. I think it's an interesting development. Technology has always redefined the work we do. Going back to our very starts in terms of a plough, basic technology that allowed us to make surplus, which led to more food. That food paid for potters, developed villages. The whole connection in terms of we've always redefined work. Back in the 80s, and I don't know if anyone's on the call remembers that, but we used to have typists in offices. Do we have typists anymore? No. But the machines that were brought in that said we'll replace them, actually the people reskilled and became administrators. So we're actually increasing the value of their capability. So I think there's some interesting trends to remember there. And I am going to challenge the trend around, I read a piece recently about COVID, whereby everyone said, oh, we transformed the organization in a few days or in 10 days. No, you didn't. What you did is you gave laptops to people and said, good luck. Let's see if we work. It took at least 9 to 10 months for people to adopt the right working practices. And I think that's where some of the aim that we should be focused on as a profession is transition, is helping people change, creating that change with the way we work. And that's through things like nudge and other sort of mental frameworks in order to do that. And I think going back to the close point, I think it's spot on around that understanding of data analytics. I think that, it is a dearth in the profession. We have a gap there. There aren't enough people who are able to get the insight, exploit it. And actually the value we can bring, and that goes back to my job previously, when I was a reservist with the Royal Air Force as an intelligence analyst. We should be providing people intelligence, providing predictive assessments of what is probable, likely, or possible of happening for the organization through modeling that data, so that we can be part of those conversations at strategic level, rather than this is what our absence been for the last year. This is what our absence is for the last few months. Well, that's trying to drive with a rear view mirror. It doesn't add value. And so I think that's where we've got to change that dynamic. And people don't realize that big data itself was created by HR. It came from us. We had all those systems and that's where it grew from. And I think that's something to be passionate about. But in the same light, I think we've got to be mindful that we're going back to future trends and things that are developing. A discussion I'm having next week is around the blend of HR and cybersecurity. I'm passionate about digital technology, but I've also done a cybersecurity course. And if I want to do it, I'll send you the links. It's GCHQ sponsored. It's for 8 weeks and it's free. And I tell you what, it definitely opens your mind. It's brilliant. But I know it's seeing both of the good side of that, and I think and the bad side of data. And I think that with technology, you should never blame the technology. It's the people that use it, it's those behaviours without a doubt that matter. And I think we can play more of a part as a profession to help hone not just that data and analytics mindset, but also how people use technology safely, know when to switch off, so that digital wellbeing piece. And I think the key thing, going back to underpins all this, is that we don't just do this as interventions. We focus on that lifelong learning. How do we create ongoing learning so people adapt, overcome, create resilience within the organisation, develop as individuals to do so within groups and communities? But in the same light, it's how we retrain and redeploy people that underpins that. So that's my sort of take, I think. So a bit of negative and a bit of positive, I hope.
But that's important to lay out both cases, isn't it? So then there's an objective lens that people can see, and they can take an informed decision as a consequence of it. So I think you positioned a number of topics particularly well there, and definitely in the next couple of questions we'll explore some of those, excuse me, in terms of how prepared perhaps we are to be able to deal with some of them as a community, and where the gaps might be and what we might be able to do about them. So that's a perfect segue, in fact, to Sarah, in terms of your view on it and where maybe some of the technology and the approach that you're bringing to the table, but with a conscious awareness of the other stuff that's also equally important around the people, around the background, around the behaviours, married together to deal practically with some of these challenges.
Yeah, it's interesting when you ask that question, Mark, about, you know, what trends are you seeing happening now in 2023? And I kind of put a lens on that. You know, we're going in and we're talking with companies and we're implementing in companies. And so my take on that is what's happening in these organizations that we're talking to. And we're, you know, there are some very extremely large enterprise organizations. We've got government, public sector, sort of high tech, and there's a number of themes that a number of sort of activities that are happening. There's sort of a top level, and so talking about what you were talking about, Clay, there's this organizational change. There's a lot of organizational change going on, a lot of reorgs. It just seems like organizations are in constant reorg mode, and that's, I mean, I think Harvard's business school, the HBR say that you know, typical organization continues in changes every 3 years, something like that. So that's not unusual. But what we're seeing and hearing is that I think a lot of organizations are trying to build in flexibility into their org design, flexibility into how they change, and they're trying to find ways to sort of embed that continuous change. And the culture of continuous change into their organization, but also building in flexibility and using technology to build in flexibility to enable them to do what actually is just a constant, and that is change. So we're seeing quite a lot of that, and thinking, quite a lot of innovation thinking around sort of adopting tech to enable that. The easy, because change is never easy, but to enable and make it easier to change. That's sort of one thing that we're seeing. And then I guess feeding down from that, we talked about sort of the careers, skills, careers pathways. A lot of organizations are looking at this. Some more than others. Some have it as a strategic objective. Some are sort of just having lots of conversations and looking at trying to identify skills, both skills across all their employee groups, skills across their work that they need to do, and trying to build out career pathways, lateral career pathways, moving and shifting from sort of structural, sort of linear thinking to kind of more lateral thinking, more agility. And with the objective, obviously, of trying to sort of retain, mobilize, and again, kind of playing to that, building agility into their workforce. So we're seeing quite a lot of organisations mobilising around that and putting in, you know, specific strategic initiatives around that. You mentioned, Chloe, around the tech, HR tech. So, I mean, without question, there's this, you know, sort of digitisation of HR is just sort of top and front and central. There's the digitization of services and products and services that organizations are doing in the front end, but what we're seeing increasingly is that digitization of HR. And what we've seen is that it's quite interesting, sort of about 10 years ago, organizations adopting, you know, large HCM platforms, Workday, Oracle, SAP, etc. And there seemed to be a sort of a focus from the HR tech community of saying, well, we're just going to use this HR platform. You know, we're just going to be using Workday, no other tech. And what we're seeing increasingly is actually more organizations taking a step back and going, actually, this is all about digitizing the user journey. And it's all about removing friction from users and giving them the best user experience and adopting technologies that will enable to enhance that user experience. And so they're increasingly looking to bring in more niche, to use your term, Chloe, best of breed, kind of innovative solutions that actually can plug around that ecosystem of whether it's a Workday or an Oracle or a SuccessFactors. So there's been a sort of a bit of a transformation in being much more open to thinking more creatively. And we actually, one of the criteria that we have as an organization, because we are still an early company, we're still quite young, and so a criteria for us is actually, is this organization that we are talking to that are saying they're really interested in what we're doing, are they really open to innovation? Are they open to tech? Because, you know, you kind of have to be if you're introducing new stuff, and you've got to be sort of open to be able to sort of plug it into ecosystem. So we're seeing increasingly people going out to market to solve specific problems that address pain points, but overlaying that, what we're seeing is a real focus on digitizing the end-to-end user journey and a real focus on almost consumer grade user experience. So, you know, rather than sort of, you know, dipping into one product and out into another, it's about what's that seamless experience for users, for whether it be HR, but actually for our end users, be that the employees or be managers, etc. So that's, we're saying quite a lot of that, and then I think kind of overlaid onto that, we're seeing diversity and inclusion. I mean, you know, Giles, I'm right there with you. Well, you know, I mean, quite frankly, the whole diversity agenda came to the UK because of legislation and litigation. Sorry to be really blunt about it, but so two things really there. Two things. So the diversity and inclusion, what we're seeing, it is actually in bad, high, difficult times like we are right now. It's probably the first budget to go, and sadly, and so we are seeing some clever creativity around D&I practitioners or strategic HR practitioners who are looking for ways to operationalize diversity and inclusion in a challenging environment, but effectively, cost effectively, that has high impact, and actually embedding it into processes as opposed to sort of spending a lot on big strategic initiatives. They're kind of thinking creatively about how they can sort of integrate practices into processes. And then overlaying that and playing onto the litigation piece, something that's just not going away is compliance. And it's really fascinating. I mean, we've been on quite a journey as a company around this, and in terms of seeing that actually we can support and solve quite a lot of this. It's been a bit of an eye-opener. So, I mean, the increasing compliance and legislation around pay equity, pay transparency, I mean, it's hitting the US hard at the moment. And what we're seeing, for example, in the US and the EU, so it's just been passed in the EU, and it's coming quickly here. What we're seeing, for example, in the States, is organizations all of a sudden having to figure out what their strategy is around pay transparency, but they're having to mobilize very quickly on reporting around pay equity, and their systems and processes and their data. It's so siloed that it's really difficult for them to actually operationalize it. So that's been quite interesting. We've been going on a bit of development journey with quite a few of our US clients around enabling pay transparency and pay equity, both reporting and implementation through the product, and it's been super interesting. You kind of think that people have already done it and got it, so it's super surprising when actually you realize like the level of maturity. But that's compliance around pay equity and pay transparency is definitely, it's not going away, and so we're seeing quite almost like a juxtaposition of this, everyone talking about skills-based organizations, the job is dead and all of that, yet this compliance piece is not going away, and every compliance report is based on the job or based on, so there's a bit of interesting tension going on between compliance and sort of future technologists and future workforce thinkers, and so I'm quite interested to see how that's going to pan out. And the flexibility piece, Giles, we wrote a white paper on the 4-day working week actually, which feel free anyone to download, and it's quite interesting because we're seeing organizations really struggling and grappling with the hybrid working, and actually with getting consistency and standardization of flex across teams. You've got some leaders that are, absolutely determined to see their team 3 days, the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday brigade, and then you've got, the kind of the other corner office, which is completely empty because people don't really care. So, and I think the challenge that we're seeing is you have typically like a chairman, a chief exec, the CXO level saying everyone's got to be, for us to be a fully functioning organization, everyone has to be in the office 3 days a week minimum. And the implementation of that is super challenging because actually what exponentially increased during COVID was the ability to source talent globally. And so a lot of people have got people that sit all around the world. So how can you have people coming in and working, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so it's this real tension between a desire to kind of have FaceTime and everyone working together and this and getting consistency across teams. And we're watching with interest on that one, because that's been a bit of a bandwagon. I'm a bit of an evangelist around flex for many years. So that, I mean, that in a nutshell, that's.
I was going to ask you, Sarah, a really interesting topic. And one of the things I picked up with our clients, but also I went to the Economist conference, is ignore your colleagues at your peril. And if you don't tune in and listen to the culture of your organization and you do mandate from the top, you'll lose people. Are you seeing that across the clients you work with?
Yeah, we are seeing that. So I mean, for the audience listening in, so flexible working is a bit of a passion project of mine. I've been on a bit of a bandwagon around flexibility and for the last 20 years. And, the hybrid working is a bit of a no-brainer, and us being able to work remotely during COVID is just, well, hallelujah, everyone's suddenly woken up. But absolutely, I think, we are, I mean, definitely, I think it's a big challenge for a lot of organizations. And we're seeing that, one really big customer, I'm not going to name any names, but they mandated from the top that they insisted that everyone came in 3 days a week, and people have been leaving in droves. People have been leaving, and great people. So it's super challenging, and yeah, it's a hot topic at the moment, and I don't think anybody's particularly got it right, apart from those businesses that started out as remote first organizations. And there's a couple of $1 billion organizations that started that way, and have built to a $1 billion tech business, and built from a remote first, and we're watching them quite with eagle eyes.
I can imagine. And I think what's coming out in this dialogue is, for some people the future is the here and now. For others, it might as well be talking about getting to the moon and building your own rocket. So for you, that whole world that you're living in is one you understand and you're guiding clients through, and you've got the tools and technique and some processes and a product to help guide them through, which is wonderful. Chloe, in terms of you, your customers, those who are used to that world that Sarah talked about in terms of the competency frameworks, the skills, the job, all sitting in a core HCM product, and the last 20 years of moving from one to the other, maybe taking some best of breed solutions, bolting them on, maybe going back to an ERP, the whole kind of technology mix. How do you see that playing out to recognize that virtual talent, virtual team and skills is becoming a thing that people need access to, and in an understandable, digitally easy to understand way?
Yeah, I mean, I see this as the whether it's an emerging theme. It's really interesting how you frame that, Sarah, that it's your here and now, and I think absolutely it is the here and now. That digital experience, and I 100% concur with you. Digital experience for our colleagues has got to be as good as it is as a consumer. I give you a really great example. So I just got a new car, and I bought that car 95% of it online. I had one interaction with the actual garage for 30 minutes, and the experience was outstanding. And if you play that into what we know, and I can talk to you about some incredible horrors, in fact, I'll give you one story. One day I went into a store, into a room, and a colleague sat there looking at, and we've digitalized the whole induction process. And she sat like this, really close to a screen. And I said, "Oh, hello," introduced myself. "How are you doing? What are you doing?" "I'm doing my induction." So I said, "Why are you sat so close to the screen?" "It's like I'm lip reading because we haven't got sound." So the person couldn't even hear the experience. And so digital has to be, whoever used the words, I don't know who it was, people and the digital together, absolutely has to be at the heart of driving a colleague experience end to end in an organization. 100% agree with that. And I do see our clients, and I see my colleagues absolutely doing what Sarah said, which is pain points, understanding what's best and taking best of breed. I think, albeit I was in a virtual round table a few weeks ago, and some organizations are still wedded to, I have to make this HCM work for me, because the value in which they are investing into it. But I think it's the challenge on the big vendors to move quickly, to innovate, or to work in a way that does mean that they collaborate or understand how to optimize and get the best out of the what's emerging in the market, because the market's moving quicker than I think sometimes the vendors can. But there is a massive curiosity in our clients to fix pain points with the best solution that's going to give the best outcome, albeit with a really big backdrop of how do you get this value word and cost, and maybe that's because I spent my last sort of 5 years in a really low cost margin business where you have to get every penny to work. But certainly, I think HR functions are becoming much more aware of and, driving to think bigger and broader than they have done before.
And I think that's a segue into Giles, being aware of it, wanting to be prepared for it, and being able to do something about it. Giles, do you see that the skill sets and the competence of our senior leaders within HR is technically sufficient to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, to understand some of the challenges that Sarah and Chloe are talking about? Because it's been a complex, increasingly more technical world that we live in for the last 10, 15 years, and it's getting more complicated. But I personally didn't see a huge acceleration of technical prowess within the world of HR, increasing, but not at the pace with which the technology was advancing. But what are you seeing out there? Has anything changed?
Simple answer is no. I think that, well, joking aside, I think that there are pockets of change, and it's how we profile those, share them, and make sure they collaborate with others and connect with others to share their experiences that matters. I think there is a desire and a drive to do so, but whether or not that's actually happening very much depends on the size of the organisation. So for the large organisations, which may be across the UK, for example, may represent maybe 5 to 6% of businesses, whereas most are SMEs, that ability to fund the kind of change and the systems that are there very different. But then there's the opportunities which people don't see. You don't have to have an HRS in-house. You can do it as a service. It's software as a service. There's an opportunity there, but obviously there's the GDPR stuff in terms of data and training. I've done it myself, implement that service. It works and it can work really well. But I think they still haven't necessarily got to grips with that technology piece, and that then I think leads to this dearth in data analytics. And I think that's because sometimes with HR, there's more about controlling stuff through a policy rather than actually developing people in terms of practices. And by that, I mean that, if you look at social media as a classic example, more often not, it's trying to sort of control how people use it rather than provide guidance and encourage it as a collaborative space. And that probably then knocks down the ability of people to use MS Teams, because that's a collaborative space of using a social technology just internalized. So I think this is where I think people are focused on HCMS, HRS, whatever you would call it, as a system being their solely point. But what they haven't done is create an ecology of technology that allows people to use it in a different way. And that's where I think there's a model that I was asked to put together some proposals around what business partnering might look like over the next 10 years. And one of the models that I suggested was the digital partner, which took Ulrich's three model of three-legged stool of the shared service, the Centre of Expertise or Excellence, and then the strategic business partners. And so, well, actually, you can overlay that with the digital model, whereby you've got the HR systems and the ecology providing the shared service element, the self-service capability. You've got the suite of apps, which can be the Centre of Expertise. You can tap into various apps that might recruit for you, run social performance, etc. But then that partnering piece is very much done through social HR as a practice. So how do we use those technologies to build communities, practices, learn, and create those platforms and opportunities to do so? And there was contraction in terms of people saying that, but whether it'll work is another matter, because people don't have the capability or the capacity currently. And I think that therefore the simple answer is I don't think there's been the move. There is the desire and the drive, but I don't think, because actually I think a lot of people in HR are still licking their wounds from COVID. And I think HR as a whole, as a profession, haven't had the opportunity perhaps to take stock and breathe, because they've had to deal with everything. And they're right, let's go back to normal. And that's why, with all due respect and out of pure humour, I changed my job title LinkedIn over a year ago to HRGP. I used to be called the Chief Navigator for the Hitchhiker's Guide to HR, but I changed it to HRGP because I felt like a general practitioner, because I actually spent quite a bit of COVID having calls with HR professionals because they were burnt out and there was no one else they could turn to, because everyone turned to them. They were gravity, providing follow support. What do we need to do in terms of? And so as a result, I think that's where perhaps we haven't given people a chance to breathe, and that may be part of the reason why. But I don't think there's, in answer to your question, there isn't that drive, I think. And I think this goes also that technology, there's this thing at the moment with technology replacing people, and HR are obviously quite passionate about that for the right reason, not in terms of replacing people, but they understand the ethics of it, which is the question. It's not whether, it's not could you replace with technology, it's should you, is it another, because work provides purpose and there's a lot more to it in terms of people's lives. And people on this call will judge. If you go to a party, one of the first questions people ask you is, what do you do? It's, well, you're judging straight with someone by their job, which is, is that right? Well, I don't think so. And I think that whereas everyone's focused on things like chat GPT in terms of AI, which is very narrow, it's not generalized, it's very narrow, but we're focused on AI, artificial intelligence, potentially replace people. The sweet spot for us when we talk about technologies, I talk about IA, not AI, it's IA, intelligence augmented. How we're using technology and tools and practices in order to create collaboration, to communicate more effectively, to build communities both virtually and then connect in the real space, because technology allows that connection in between the physical connections, which again then feeds back to this hybrid working mindset. So in a nutshell, I think we're on the journey. I don't think we're going as fast as people want, and yet the world, exactly as Chloe and Sarah both said, is changing quicker than expected. But I don't think, again, we can't beat people up if they haven't had a chance to lick the words and breathe. We've got to give them some support and guidance.
Mark, can I jump in and ask this question? Because I just want to bring together, as a HR practitioner for the last 25 years, something Sarah and Giles have said, which is absolutely right. So this restructuring every 3 years, that's so old. It's restructuring every 6 months. At least every organization they know when they're going to normally have a go live. They know when it is. It happens every year. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And I think HR teams are now so lean, they have become so incredibly lean that they are no longer able to be really specialist unless HR invests in the individuals or the function or a partner or the expertise. So the answer by Glenn, how equipped do you feel HR to actually lead change and drive adoption rather than transactional? In my honest opinion, in all my, the last 5 years, people can't, to Giles's point, they cannot stand still long enough in everything they've got to do to be able to look up and look out. So no, I don't think they are equipped, and they either need to build or buy, classic talent decision, but actually make a decision to invest in some way.
And in the last 30 seconds, I think that's a lovely way to wrap up that whole conversation with Louis and tie the two together. That's brilliant. Sara, Giles, do you have anything from your perspectives in your final 30 seconds each to close out on that point? I know that's potentially putting a lot of information in a very...
No pressure.
Ladies first, Sarah.
To close out on that past point around HR, yeah, I mean it's quite interesting, isn't it? I've seem to have got myself on a bit of a bandwagon talking about, look, if you're wanting to build innovation into an organization, if you're wanting to build change into an organization, you've got to build capacity for that into an organization. So you can't leave it to people who are incredibly busy to be doing it off the sides of their desks. So I'm right there behind you, Chloe. You've either got to build that capacity into the individual and capability into the individual, or you bring that in.
Mm-hmm.
Love that. I think for far too long we've tried to do this as well as the day job, and in reality it didn't work when people weren't so exhausted with helping other people. Now there's less people to do it, and they're even more tired than they've ever been. So the old analogy of being the last person to put the mask on ourselves as HR and payroll people on the plane, still exactly what we're doing. There's just less of us now. And Giles, your last 30 seconds, and then we're literally going to get cut off from our audience.
No worries. Well, just I'd say I agree with exactly what Chloe and Sarah said. I can't add any more value. They've nailed it in terms of that perspective. But what I would say is, going back to my point about transition, going back to Glenn's question about transactional, yeah, I think people are getting trapped in that in terms of transactional, doing the day-to-day stuff, not necessarily connecting what they do from an operational context to the strategic outcomes. And that, again, I'll push back in terms of that sweet spot for us is transitional. How do we get there? And it is about creating that change, breathing, whether it's nudging, whether it's through creating a pilot, which allow people to move and develop, but give them a safe space to do so. That, again, I think we have to take our own medicine, because HR is, or the people profession sometimes is that cobbler's children thing, whereby we do everything for everyone else, and actually we've got to do this ourselves. And actually, going back to business partnering mindset, which I look after, it should be in partnership with the organization. We should evolve alongside it and develop this capability so we can work with them more effectively and deliver outcomes. So that's me in a nutshell there.
Brilliant. You know what? We could probably go on for at least 3 hours with these topics, and I would learn a great deal as well as our audience. But thank you, Sarah, Chloe, and Giles, for your insights. I'm absolutely certain that the audience would have taken a lot of real good practice information and helpful tips away, as we said we do. We will put this or a summary of this on our social media so that people can listen back or re-listen if they were on the call. And I'd like to thank you as panelists and thank the audience for participating. I've really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
We enjoyed it too.